Today I wanted to review Tangled, Twisted. Yes, Twisted, the Tangled History of Black Hair Culture. And this is written by Emma Dabiri. I picked this up because I was curious about what she had to say, but also because of the author's background, her ancestral background, and her life experience made me curious as well. So Emma Dabiri is of Irish and Nigerian descent, and she grew up in Ireland in predominantly white skinned neighborhoods and schools and stuff like that. So she had that upbringing. And then she went to, I forgot which school, she went to college in Atlanta, Georgia. And she has lived in the United States at some point, and she also has her family in Nigeria. So her lived experience made me curious, her take on the Black hair culture. And so I wanted to give it a read for that reason, as well as just to see what I could learn from the history that she put in here. So in this book, she talks about how racist ideals are perpetuated to suppress African and African American people's confidence in themselves based on their identifier, which is our hair, which I am covering up today appropriately. So, yes, she talks about a great deal of history. She uses global history, slavery times, and post-slavery. She talks about American traditions as well as European and African traditions, and how a lot of African American hair culture is influenced by European standards that are being forced on African Americans. And when she's talking about Black hair culture, it seems to be specifically African American, not African, because there is a distinction between African hair culture and African American hair culture. They don't wear the same hairstyles that we wear here in the States. So she does make that distinction in this book. And she also talks about how we have taken certain traditions from Africa and modernized it in a way that would be best suited for the U.S. So she uses that history. She also talks about pop culture and how popular figures, white-skinned celebrities, have taken Black hairstyles and used them to gain some type of fashion cred, I guess, if you will, and the differences in the reception of when, like, for example, Bo Derek, who we are still talking about today and giving her praise for wearing corn braids, how she wears corn braids as a white-skinned woman, and she is praised as a fashion icon. And meanwhile, Black women have been wearing corn braids for, forever. And not only do we not get the same reception, but we are also portrayed as ghetto or unprofessional. And for a long time, many corporations and institutions would have it in their handbooks, in their employee and student, whatever handbooks, specifically stating that you can't wear certain hairstyles that typically are worn by African Americans. So we as Black women, we are being criminalized, or some of us we're not allowed to wear our hairstyles that we love and that are best suited for our hair texture. We're not allowed to wear them, but if a white person wears it, of course they get the utmost respect and praise. Also, we see it in schools as well, that the kids are being sent home for wearing dreads and stuff like that. So she goes over the appropriation of the Black hair culture. She also talks about the education and how in schools, cosmetology schools, how it's not even taught. If you want to become a hairstylist, you are taught European hairstyles, basically, that will work on white people's hair. And so she talks about how Madam C.J. Walker, and also I can't remember the name, but the person who is behind Mixed Chicks and Shea Moisture and those brands, the rise of the natural hair care phenomenon that probably, well, I mean, it kind of comes and goes. So, but recently she was talking about that as well. And there's just a lot of different things she talks about in this book. If you are a history buff, I think you would really enjoy this book. But also, if you're just someone interested in learning about Black hair culture, specifically, I would say more along the lines of African American hair culture. There is some information about African hairstyles and traditions and how it came from that continent and transitioned into what we do here in the States, but it was basically influenced by Africa. So she does talk about that as well. And she talks about some high profile people, Madonna, like I said, Bo Derek. Can't think of anyone. She talks about some historical moments in our history, like the Black Power movement and Angela Davis, and how women were wearing their natural afros and going to work with that. But then they were getting pushback because it's linked to a political movement. So white skinned people saw that as threatening, and then that became an issue, so we couldn't wear our afros. So there's a lot of history in here, there's a lot of politics in here, and I really enjoyed what I did learn. Some of it I already knew, because if you are educated in American history, I should say, some of it is familiar already, because they kind of interconnect history, well, I should say American history and the Black hair culture. They intersect, I should say, in some areas. So some of it has to do with, points in our history that we are already familiar with. And then there's some new information in here. There also was a section about how Black men felt about Black women's hair. It was interesting to hear Black men's take on how they are perceived in the workplace and in society, because it is easy for me to focus on how myself and how Black women are perceived, but I do tend to forget that discrimination carries over to Black men as well. So she did have a section that focused on their comments on Black women and wig wearing, but also on why they choose to wear certain haircuts or why they choose not to wear braids or dreads, and it was interesting that she put that section in there. So yes, it covers a lot of ground in this book. I thought it was a fascinating read, and I would recommend it if you're interested in the Black hair culture and its history, So yes, I would recommend this. I enjoyed it. And those are my thoughts. All right. I am out. Bye.